Have you ever noticed that fear, the idea of something, is so often more frightening than the actual reality of the event itself? The concerns we have, the things that play on our mind and at times can keep us awake at night, if allowed to, have a powerful effect on the way we live our lives. Interestingly, the most common concerns that trouble us today aren't new. Many of them are centuries old. Many of them were happening in Jesus' time too. Jesus' teaching was real. He was present. He understood the situations and circumstances and worries and fears that affected people. And he cared. He listened. He was attentive to their cries. But he didn't leave them in their struggles either. It's interesting that the things that weighed heavy on people 2,000 years ago in Jesus' day are seemingly very similar to the situations and concerns and things that we worry about today. He knew these things. He taught about worry. He was not absent. He understood. In the first book of the New Testament, a book called Matthew, we read of Jesus' teaching on the subject of worry, and he has some advice. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? So Jesus cares, he understands and he gets it. But he has some advice. Look at the birds of the air. Might sound like strange advice. He's saying, look up. Look at the birds of the air. Birds are interesting. If you look up, if you look at the birds of the air, they are beautiful, they're delicate, they're tender, but yet they're strong. They soar and fly effortlessly. And when we look up, when we look at the birds of the air, we are captivated by their beauty, by their incredible grace and ease of which they fly and soar and swoop. We can't help but be swept away in the wow and wonder of God's goodness and God's creation when we look up. Recently we went kayaking as a family, and it was the first time my daughter had been in a kayak on her own. It was great fun. At first she was nervous, she was concerned, is the kayak going to tip over? Am I going to get splashed? Am I going to get wet? And actually she did really great, it was really good. And as we were paddling down the river, there was a moment where we saw some movement in a branch about 40 foot above us in a tree. And we looked, and two eagles dived out of the nest and swooped over the river and flew directly above our heads. It was an incredible sight. And in that moment, we instantly were distracted by the wow and the wonder and the beauty of these incredible birds. And in that moment, any worry or anxiety or fear of the boat tipping over or getting wet completely melted away. So when Jesus teaches to look at the birds of the air, I think he's onto something. What we look at shapes our direction of travel. When we walk, we look ahead. We don't just look at our shoes, we look at the direction that we're headed in. Where we set our gaze determines the way we think, the way we feel, the way we live. Jesus' teaching was similar to some other teaching found in the Old Testament. There's a psalm where it says, I look to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. In that psalm, similar to in Jesus' teaching, we are being encouraged to look beyond the circumstances of the things that worry us and weigh us down, and to look at things that are bigger and beautiful and wonderful. Why? Because in those things we see the fingerprints of God. We see God's goodness. We see God's creation. We see something that is bigger than ourselves. But yet we see it in the context as a gift from a God who is attentively caring for us in every way at the same time. Jesus' rhetorical question, can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? We kind of know the answer. And the answer is no. In fact, too much worry and too much stress can probably take hours off your life. It can work the other way. So what are we to do? How do we navigate the very real worries, concerns, stresses of life? Jesus has some advice. Look up. Look at the birds of the air. Look at something bigger than yourself. Look at something beautiful. Look at something wonderful. And remember that the God who made that also made you. I had a friend of mine that told me a story. There was a time when she was having a panic attack and she didn't know what to do. So she phoned a good friend, and her friend gave her some advice, which I didn't understand at the time, but the advice went something like this. Go outside, go out into your back garden, and look at the sky, look up. She took her friend's advice, she went outside, she looked up, and she continued to talk on the phone. And over the next few minutes, she began to breathe easier and feel a sense of peace and calm. And I didn't really understand what was going on, but it was later explained to me why the advice was as it was. And then it was told to me that by looking up, the airways are fully opened. So for the person having the panic attack, the advice was good advice because they looked up and suddenly they could breathe easier. Looking up is good for us. I wonder what things are on your mind. I wonder what worries or fears or concerns you might have. Jesus cares. So be real with them, be true with them. Call them what they are. But don't stick with them. Listen to Jesus' advice. Look up, look at the birds of the air. Look to Him, look to God, look up.